So today we're going to be experimenting with cyanotype. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's a... So today we're going to be experimenting with cyanotype. Now, if you don't know what that is, of course I get an email. Are you blue? What? Are you blue? Whatever. What? Why does it all say blue? What? Hello? So today, we're going to be experimenting with cyanotype. Now, if you're unfamiliar with cyanotype, it's a process in which you put a chemical on a piece of paper, you expose it to the sun, and then the paper turns blue. The cool thing about it, though, is if you block out the sun or you block out the paper from being exposed in certain parts, it remains white. So you can kind of get this really cool effect where some of the paper is blue and some of it's white. It's got a really cool contrast. So for instance, my friend Liam, who actually inspired me to make this video, he posted this design a couple weeks back and it just inspired me to want to try this out for myself. And just to be clear, I don't have any experience with this. I've never done it before. So really, we're just gonna have to try some stuff and see what happens. But with that being said, my goal is to create a design that I can then transfer onto the cyanotype so that way I have a cyanotype design. But first, I want to just do an experiment with this design. So what I'll do is I'm going to print it on a transparent film so that way I can lay it on top of my piece of paper as it's exposing. So hopefully I can block out the sun from exposing on the areas that I want to keep white. This first attempt is really just to see what happens and just to see what I can learn from the experiment. Obviously, I might get something bad, I might get something good. I really don't know. I'm just going to have to do it and see what happens. So I spent yesterday just doing a bunch of experiments and just seeing what I could come up with and see what I could learn from it. So with the practice piece I did, here's what it ends up looking like. I'll put a JPEG of it here that I scanned in just with some slight adjustments to the contrast, but as you can see, it did not come out quite perfect. But through all three of these tests, I think I've managed to learn a couple of things that will help me whenever I'm making a design specifically for the cyanotype. So the first thing that I learned is that at least for my printer, it doesn't really print large blocks of black very well. So for instance, the example piece that I did, it has the white bottom, but since we don't want that to be exposed, it has to be completely black, and it just doesn't really handle that much black ink that well. Which kind of goes along with my next thing that I learned, which is that the clear paper that I'm using, the ink doesn't actually sink into it, and it just sits on top. So you could actually just kind of like put your hand on it and then just smear it right off. So not only do I have to be extremely careful whenever I'm handling it, because if I touch it, it's gonna smear, but also if I were to, take a piece of glass and put it on top of it, it's possible that the ink, instead of just kind of sitting there, is actually gonna kind of be compressed and then smeared. So as far as the design goes, I'm gonna try not to use as much white space, so that way I don't have to print as much black, and hopefully I can avoid some of the issues that I was running into. And then whenever I go to expose it, I'm gonna make sure that I'm not putting too much pressure on that clear film, so that way I'm not smearing or compressing or doing anything to the ink, and hopefully it's just sitting right on top as close as it can possibly can without touching. So with those things in mind, let's get into Photoshop. So of course, starting out, I didn't really have a solid idea that I really wanted to use for this poster design. So I would just kind of bring in a couple images and just kind of combining them and seeing if I could find anything that really piqued my interest or drew me to them. Because honestly, at this point, I really don't have anything. So I'm just trying to get something made, just get something working so that way I can eventually figure it out as I go. While working on the designs and thinking about kind of the cyanotype design as well as the kind of emotions that I might want to evoke through the poster, so what I decided on was to use a song for inspiration. So there's a band named Knocked Loose that I really like, and they have an album called A Different Shade of Blue. Yeah, I know, it's a little bit on the nose, but I mean, sue me, it's blue. What am I gonna do? Anyways, they have a song called Trapped in the Grasp of a Memory. For some reason, I just felt drawn to that idea and that song. So I just kind of wanted to make something that was kind of loosely based around that song. And I eventually landed on a rough composition that I was at least happy with the direction that it was going. So really from there, it was just kind of nailing down all the details and adding everything that I want to add to it, as well as the imagery. And I played around a lot with the typography because not only did I want the typography to be interesting, I also had to kind of go along with the constraints that I had already mentioned, where I don't want there to be too much white space because then it's going to print out really black and I don't think it's going to come out very well. And so I'm trying to kind of work around that, and it doesn't really help that the image is already pretty dark. And so I'm trying to kind of find a balance between the two so that way there's not too much white space, so whenever I invert it, it's just a bunch of black. So hopefully I'm finding a good balance between the two so that way there's still the legibility, but I'm not kind of ruining the cyanotype print. But after that, it was just really adding just some extra textures and some small elements and just calling it there. So typically, this is the part in the video where I show you a nice final piece, but instead, I get to show you absolute garbage. Earlier today, I set up 2 pieces of paper so I could do it twice and see what happens. The first one turned out like this, which is not great. And the second one where I thought, oh, maybe I figured out what's going wrong. Here's a fix for it. It turned out even worse. So I just crumpled it up and threw it away because it wasn't even worth looking at. I think right now my biggest issue is even though I live in the sunshine state, I literally can't get 5 minutes of sunshine. It's just been cloudy and rainy 2 days straight. Every time that I go outside to expose these, it's literally like, oh, hey, you're exposing something. You need the sunlight. Yeah, it's raining and overcast right now. Good luck. And then it just stays that way for the rest of the day and I can't do anything. I'm also still having trouble with the ink from the transparent film. I don't know if I just need to let it sit longer to dry or if I need to do something else because it keeps on smearing or getting wiped off or just becoming a big black blob. And I don't know why I can't just seem to get it to just print on the paper and then just expose it onto the sheet of paper without it just kind of being ruined. So needless to say, this is going absolutely terrible and I'm incredibly frustrated. So what I'm going to do is tonight I'm going to prep some pages for tomorrow, hope that I can actually get some sunlight, and then hope for a better result. Because at this point, I don't really know what else I can do. Anyways, I'll see you tomorrow when I'm not in a crappy mood. All right, so I prepped everything for today. I let everything sit overnight, so hopefully everything is completely dry and ready for today. Really, I'm hoping that I don't have any more headaches and I at least get something decent. I'm not really expecting perfect, but at least something that's usable or at least looks half decent, you know, I'll be happy with at this point. So I prepared 2 sheets of paper. I already have one of them outside exposing right now. We're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. So it's been going for a couple minutes. I'm gonna wait about 20 more minutes or so before I go back out there. from what I can see, it's already exposing really well. So right now it's just hoping that the details actually come out and it looks the way that I hope it does. So just wait now and see what happens. Hi again, it's been maybe an hour and I have an update. Despite doing everything I possibly can, it turns out I'm only capable of getting worse. Because here's where we ended up with everything that I've done, including waiting 12 hours for everything to dry, including not only the cyanotype chemicals, but also the transparent film. So I'm doing it one more time. I'm going to let it dry for about an hour. I can at least save the transparent film that I had so I don't have to reprint anything. So I'm going to do that, and I was exposing everything for 20 minutes. I'm going to try exposing it for like 5 or 10, see if maybe the issue is that I'm just overexposing it. That's about all I can do. So if that doesn't work, then I guess I just am destined to suck at cyanotype for the rest of my life, and I am cursed. But if we make any progress, or at least get something halfway decent, then we'll continue to figure it out. So I'll update you in a little bit. All right, so we don't have great results, but we do have improving results, which is good. So now, after making some adjustments to my process, we're now here, which is still not great, but at least there's something here rather than just being one big blue sheet. So we're making improvements. So what I did differently was I didn't expose it so long. And another thing that I did was making sure that the transparent film was as close to this page as I could possibly get it. I literally taped this down, and then I taped the transparent film on top of it. So hopefully the shadows would be as harsh and as crisp as they possibly could, rather than being like, a little bit of a distance away, even if it's only marginal, because it's such a small space, it adds up. All right, so I have 2 more sheets of this drying, so that way we can try again in about an hour or so, whenever they're dry. I taped those down, so hopefully even as they dry, they don't bend or curl up, so they should be flat as possible. And then I can just tape my transparent film on top. I think also what happened was, because the transparent film was a little bit older, I think some of the ink just kind of ended up just congealing together. That's why I have all these like little tiny spots, rather than just kind of like one slick surface, which is kind of what happened with the first one that we did, where it feels a little bit more consistent, rather than like all these little teeny tiny dots. And what I did then was I printed it out, and I had it out for maybe 30 minutes, and then I used it rather than like an entire night. So I think that might also help. So hopefully the next tries that we do will actually have some results that are even halfway decent. I will take anything that is good at this point, at least anything better than this, and I will consider it a win. And then maybe at some other point I can revisit these, and maybe we can figure something else out, because man, this has been quite frustrating so far. But I'm glad that maybe we're at a point where we'll actually start making something cool, rather than just trying things and failing. So I'll see you guys in a little bit. So anybody that knows me personally will know that I'm way too stubborn to give up on just about anything, even if I would really like to. So here we are. I've been thinking about this problem for a day or so, just thinking about like, what could I possibly do to get around this issue with, I guess, what is really just my printer not just being able to print on the transparency sheet, or unless it's the transparency sheet, that's the problem. But anyways, it's the print itself that I believe is the biggest issue. It has nothing to do with the cyanotype or the exposing. I think I've got that down. It's just getting a good enough way to expose the image, but the ink that's being put on the transparency sheet just isn't working. But I do know this technique where you take clear packing tape, you can put it on a piece of paper that has ink, then you can soak it in some water, and then you can peel off the paper, and then you should have a decent print on the other side of it. So that's what I did here. I literally just printed out a complete sheet of paper, and then just took multiple layers of clear packing tape, and then just packed it on, and I tried to rub it on as good as I possibly can, and now I'm just letting it soak in this water. So I will then peel off the paper, which I might have to kind of rub some off, just depending. and we'll see if maybe I can get the ink to be dense enough to where it will actually, you know, create a shadow on the piece of paper, so that way it doesn't get exposed whenever we do the cyanotype and we're exposing in the sun. I don't know if this will work, but it's the only other thing I can think of for right now, unless there's just something else I can do. But I figured this is something that I do know how to do, so I might as well start here. So here we are. So I'm gonna peel this off. It's been sitting for 5 minutes or so and see how it goes. So this might be as good as I can get it. I just done a bunch of stuff. I don't know if it's even gonna be legible, but the best idea that I got for now. So I'll let it dry and I'll see if it's worth using once it's dry. All right, so I let it dry. I tried to peel off as much as I possibly could. And this is where we ended up. You might not be able to tell, but it looks terrible. It's not usable. But, so I was doing some research last night, trying to figure out, once again, some ways that I could make this work. And I found somebody who was showing people how they can use printer paper and baby oil to do screen printing t-shirts. Now, if you don't know anything about screen printing t-shirts, it actually shares a lot of similarities with Cyanotype, at least in the fact that you're going to put something on your screen and then you're blocking out the light in order to expose or not expose something. So as of right now, the plan is to get my sheet of paper with the Cyanotype on it, then put my glass pane on top of that, and then put a regular printed sheet of paper with my design on it, spread baby oil on it so that way the white goes clear, go out, expose it, bring it back in, and then hopefully we'll have something that's at least half decent. The way that I'm looking at it, the baby oil is going to interact with the white of the paper and then turn it translucent. So hopefully it'll be able to have that kind of gradation and we'll still get all of the kind of different values that we want out of it. Honestly, I'm not really sure how it's going to turn out, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So let's do it. Alrighty, so I just tried my theory with the baby oil and still not great. It's better. Like there's actually some kind of definition here. You can actually kind of read this. You can kind of see her face here and the hands here, but it's not as great as I would have hoped. So I think the main reason behind that is the paper wasn't quite as clear as I thought it would. So instead of being completely see-through or mostly see-through, kind of had a little bit of a frosted glass kind of look where you could definitely see through it, but there was still some of that white haze, which I think is why this isn't quite as blue as some of the other ones, because it didn't really get exposed as much technically. And I think also because of that, that's why we don't really have any like harsh lines for any of the details here, because it was basically like a hazy glass. So like the shadows couldn't be harsh. I'm thinking that maybe what I could do is just use this, sharpen it up a little bit, and then add the text back in, just so you can actually read what's going on. That's kind of what I'm thinking, at least as of right now. I do have one other thing, and it's probably the last thing that I'm going to try, which is to use Mod Podge on one of the pieces of paper, put it onto one of the transparent films, and hopefully I can wash off the paper, so that way I'm just left with the ink. I don't really know if it's going to work. I'm really hoping it does, because it's the last thing that I'm going to try, and if it doesn't, then we'll go from there, but I'm going to do that, and then we'll see what happens. So, see you in a bit. All right, so despite my best efforts, the Mod Podge did not work. Out of all the things that I've tried so far, that's actually probably been the worst. It's totally possible that I did something wrong and I missed a step or something and that would have fixed the problem, but as of right now, I really just don't know, and I've tried so many different things, so at this point, I'm just going to have to say that I'm not going to be able to make this work. But with that being said, I wouldn't feel really good about leaving the video here without any sort of final design or something at the end of it. So here's my plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scan in all of the Cyanotype failed experiments that I've done, and the worst case scenario, I'll just start using them as textures or something else, but I want to make a design using whatever I have now, whether that's combining the Cyanotype experiments with the original design I had or just coming up with something that's completely different. So let's go make something cool. So for this design, I actually did have something in mind that I kind of wanted to create. Seeing that dark, rich blue really got me thinking about fine china and the aesthetic that it has. And so I kind of wanted to make something that was kind of loosely based on that. And so what I wanted to do was have some kind of like marble, you know, really white statue, and then just kind of layer in all of these blue shapes around it. So that way we have that really nice blue accent. And I really thought that would be a great way to kind of use those blue textures that I have. That way I'm not doing anything too complicated or crazy. It's simple but effective, and I think it creates a really cool image. And funny enough, it's also kind of the opposite of how I normally work, because normally I work with a lot of reds and oranges. So it's kind of fun that I'm doing the very opposite here and working with a very deep blue. But anyways, it's really just kind of layering in a bunch of stuff, trying to figure out the composition that I want, making sure that everything feels balanced and interesting. I really just like to spend a lot of time kind of figuring this out. There's not really a straightforward way of doing it, so it's really just a bunch of intuition and then just kind of moving around and taking things away until I get to a composition that I feel pretty happy with. Once I had everything pretty much roughed in where I wanted to, I off camera spent a lot of time just kind of working on the typography. I wasn't really sure if I was going to do something much different than what you saw here or something similar, so that's why I didn't record, but you'll see where I ended up. So here's the final result. Like I said earlier, my main inspiration for this poster design, kind of like that old fine china with that kind of cobalt or blue kind of style. Obviously, it's being used in a much different way than it would normally, but I still think that at least aesthetically, they kind of match, and that's kind of what I was going for. I also got to play around with typography, which I always enjoy. So I think altogether, this poster came out really well, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. So even though I am happy with how this poster turned out, I am still a little bummed out that I wasn't able to get the original idea to work. You know, just taking the original design that I had and then creating a cyanotype out of it. But unfortunately, I just don't seem to have the capabilities to do that right now. So maybe I'll be able to revisit this in the future. If you guys have any suggestions, please let me know. I would love to actually get this to work at some point in the future. But with all that being said, if you enjoyed this video or if you found it helpful at all, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the rest of my channel and then consider subscribing. I hope to see you in the next video.